Welcome to Keep the Line Moving, the podcast where leadership meets life and inspiration. Here we spotlight extraordinary leaders. We're diving deep into how they inspire, motivate, and lead with strategy and empathy to achieve the extraordinary. Here we go. Episode 136 of the podcast, and our topic is Flex Your Feelings. We will talk about what this premise means with author Dr. Emily Anhalt, who's also a clinical psychologist and therapist. Her book, which comes out today, is called Flex Your Feelings, Train Your Brain to Develop the 7 Traits of Emotional Fitness. We will get into those 7 traits as well as so much more with Emily. She's a speaker, consultant, and also the co-founder of Coa. Coa is your gym for mental health. It's an online therapist-led learning experience. She's also a LinkedIn learning facilitator. We will talk about the premise of healthy leaders, healthy teams, healthy returns. There's so much here to uncover. From Emily's website, it says, teams run by emotionally fit leaders and powered by emotionally fit teammates are more productive, creative, and successful. That's the core of this conversation with this Silicon Valley-based clinical psychologist, speaker, therapist, and author, Dr. Emily Anhalt. Okay, Dr. Emily, there's so much to get to. You're one of those guests where I just feel like we got to get after it because there's so much rich information. How are you doing today?
I'm good and I'm ready.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. So your book comes out today. Let's start there. Let's not bury the lead, Emily. What do you think of this book? How was the process? What are your overall emotions and feelings going on?
Oh, it's so exciting that it's finally out. Writing a book is a process, it's a journey. And what was really incredible about it was getting to put the things I've been thinking about for almost 2 decades all in one place and really see the information come together. And something that I do in the book that I really don't do anywhere else is I included clinical examples, actual stories from my private practice of people who are working on their mental and emotional health in this proactive way. And I got to tell their stories, and I even included a few stories of my own. And as a therapist, I tend to be a little tight-lipped about my own life on social media, etc. But in this book, I give a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look.
And that's interesting. What prompted you to do that? To go a little bit more transparent in your offering in a medium, which is a book different from social media or LinkedIn or all the above?
Ultimately, I think that asking people to read a book is, in a way, asking them to trust you. And I feel that in order to open myself up to that trust, I wanted to share a little bit, at least, of my personal experience with the topic. I think my expertise comes from my work as a psychologist, but there's something about it, lived experience, that can't really be replaced. And so I wanted to show people that in the book, I talk about how before you can expect other people to change around you, you yourself have to change. And so I wanted to show, hey, I've been doing this work. I'm not just telling other people to do it. And here's a little bit about what that looks like.
I love this quote, and I think I'm going to link this quote perhaps to what you're saying, and tell me if I'm going anywhere with this. Your quote is, who you are anywhere is who you are everywhere. Is it safe to say that that's personal to you? Is that safe?
For sure. I think, one of the interesting things that I try to talk about as openly as I can is that I learned more about how to become more mentally healthy through my own therapy than I did from becoming a therapist. And so I really learned through my own therapy that the patterns I'm seeing in one area of my life are almost definitely showing up in other areas of my life. And so as I improve the relationship I have to myself, it will improve the relationship I have to others, both at work and at home. And so, especially, I work with a lot of leaders, founders, entrepreneurs. And what I want to help them understand is your work and your personal life are not two separate things. You are a human with emotions, and whether you like it or not, you bring those emotions with you to work just as much as you do anywhere else. And so, the more you can understand that, the better equipped you're going to be to have healthier relationships across the board.
And is it safe to say, because your book comes out today and I'll get a copy, of course, but is it safe to say in the book that the stories that you tell about your clients is that transformation, that realization that we are just one person. There's not this, you don't come in and put a backpack on the shelf and then, hey, I'm my work self now, where you just yelled at a barista or cut somebody off in traffic. We're one person.
Right. And I think that there's sort of a more recent acceptance of this. I think that if you look back at business a few decades ago, there was this idea that, your work life stays really separate and you should keep it really buttoned up. Work is not for you to bring your emotions, that kind of thing. And these days, I think probably because we're doing work that we're passionate about now, work isn't just about paying the bills. It's really about your identity and the change you want to make in the world. It's becoming, I think, more clear and accepted that our emotional lives are at play there. And the way I think about it is business really is just a series of relationships. And so the healthier of a relationship you have to your own self and to other people, the more successful your business is going to be.
Okay, I have a lot of questions on this book, but I know we'll talk about other things as well. But about the book, what was
Yeah.
the process like? And forgive me because I don't have the credentials you do, but I will ask it in this way. Was it therapeutic for you to write the book?
Oh, that's a cool question. It was therapeutic in the sense that I had to ask myself all of the questions that I'm asking my readers to ask themselves. I had to do all of the activities and emotional push ups, as I call them, that I'm prompting the reader to do. So, for sure, I felt myself grow in that way. But the process really throws back to many years ago, about a decade ago, when I decided to do a big research project to figure out what a more proactive approach to mental health looks like. I wanted to understand what it would look like to treat our mental health more like going to the gym and less like going to the doctor. What does it look like not to wait until things are falling apart to work on yourself? And so I did something called an interpretive phenomenological analysis. It's a fancy way of saying that I interviewed 100 psychologists and entrepreneurs. And I essentially asked them the question, how would you know if you were sitting across the table from an emotionally healthy leader, an emotionally healthy person? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What do they do? What do they not do? And out of this research came these 7 traits of emotional fitness. These are the 7 things that emotionally healthy people are working on all the time. And so then I got to do a deep dive into each of these 7 things and figure out how are they connected? Which one should you start working on? Which one is most commonly neglected? And which one am I seeing in any given client that I'm working with at any given time? Which ones should I be working on more? Which are my strengths? That kind of thing. So it all really came together over time. And then um, really getting to sort of see it all in front of me was a beautiful sort of celebration point and validation of the work I've done over the last decade to help people flex their feelings and break an emotional sweat every day.
I'm very into this topic and I think it's extremely important and I applaud your work. So I have the 7 right here.
Great.
Self-awareness, empathy, play, curiosity, resilience, mindfulness, and communication. The 7 traits through your study of emotional fitness. So Emily, you bring up a fascinating premise here. Do you know, you're advanced in this, but do we know people that we sit across from leaders that have worked on these things or worked on associated emotions and or traits? In other words, can you tell when someone has done their emotional fitness?
I think so. I mean, I think I can tell largely because of the work that I do, but I think most people can tell just based on how they leave an interaction feeling. If someone leaves an interaction with their boss feeling dismissed or belittled or ignored or, any number of things, then that's probably a sign that that boss has some work to do on themselves. And so what I do try to remind people though is one of the most common questions I get is, Emily, how can I help my manager become more emotionally fit? How can I get my boss into therapy? How can I get my spouse to work on themselves? And what I say is, you can't actually force anyone to work on themselves. You really only have control of yourself. And so the best thing you can do is get yourself into therapy, start your own emotional fitness journey, and then be really transparent about how it's improving your life. I've gotten a lot of people to go to therapy, and it's generally because I talk about myself as a patient a lot. I talk about how therapy has changed my life. I talk about how working on my emotional fitness has benefited me. And that is what tends to get other people excited to do their own work.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a follow up to that. So this is the 10 million and nowadays the $100 million question. Why would somebody be reluctant to therapy, which would then help them as a professional? In the scenario that you just painted, my boss makes me feel less than. My boss makes me feel as I'm not being heard or I'm not being included. And then perhaps, if you had a mini intervention, hey, say there was a 360 going on at the company. This is the feedback. Perhaps you might want to address this. Why would somebody, and I know we can't generalize, we're all individuals, but why do you hear from your clients? Why would someone resist that work?
So this is going to sound a little strange or counterintuitive, but we, each of us, is invested in a lot of things that aren't serving us. And by that, I mean, if you think of anything about a person that is frustrating about them or annoying about them, something that's clearly not working in their life, I can promise you at some point in their life, that trait served them in some way. It protected them, or it was the only choice they had when they were young, or there's any number of reasons why we develop certain ways of being. And then we get to adulthood, and we might know on some level that those things aren't working for us anymore, but changing them is actually very emotionally taxing because it requires you to grieve all kinds of things from your past. It requires you to see that something wasn't ideal before, and that's why you developed a less than ideal response. And it requires you to open yourself up to being very vulnerable. Change is really hard. And many of us will do quite a lot to stay the same, even when it's not really working. So often the first part of therapy is just helping people accept that self compassion is the first step. It's hard to expect ourselves to change before we understand why we are the way we are.
Dr. Emily, I'm going to share a little anecdote with you. This past semester in my leadership class at NYU, I had the students at one point, these are seniors, bring in a statistic about leadership that was of interest to them. There was no parameters. I said, you can Google it, you could go to AI, just bring in a stat that resonates with you. Invariably, a lot of their statistics were in the workplace, what leaders are doing to employees, the feeling of somebody, or the burnout nature of a leader. And there was 77, the percentages were unreal. I always think that, oh, society, we're getting better. We're understanding this. We're being more empathic, this, that. But there's a lot of real stats out there that are alarming. So my point to you is, what are you seeing? What is going on in the workplaces, the entrepreneurs that you work with? Are there common themes, or are there three that you want to bring out? What is going on, basically?
Mm. So, sure, one of the big themes I'm seeing is burnout. And I think that that burnout has lots to do with the fact that we have just been through a global collective trauma, which was the pandemic. And even though so much has been written about it, and even though we all know that we went through this hard thing, I don't know if it's been really properly recognized how traumatizing and emotionally difficult that was. And one of the things that happened during that time is our ideas about what work is supposed to look like and how we're supposed to show up and how important it is to be in person versus not, all of these things. They all got called into question. And I think we're coming out of it, and people are really tired, having not really truly processed what they've been through. And I'm seeing that get played out at work. And let me actually share a study with you that I find really fascinating that illustrates this point. So I read this study in grad school. The study was looking at prisoners of war, people who had been captured and were being tortured and were in just the most terrible conditions you can imagine. And specifically, it was looking at the dreams that they had. And what they showed was that when captured, when in this very dangerous environment, people were having really lovely dreams, dreams about their home, their spouse, food, their bed, all of the things that they longed for. But when they were released and they got home and they were in a safe environment, they started having horrible nightmares of everything that they'd been through. And the point of this article was to show that often we can't really process trauma that we are currently enduring. And it's often not until we are safe that we can really face the difficult thing that we've gone through. And so I almost feel that there's a version of that happening now, that while we were in this pandemic, we were just all kind of surviving. And now, in these few years afterwards, there's a way in which we are all paying the price for having gone through this really hard thing, and we're all, feeling the difficult feelings. So, in that way, I think burnout, anxiety, and all kinds of stress are happening. So, that's one of the big themes.
Wow, that is loaded with information. My gosh, the pandemic, it seems like it was so long ago, but it really wasn't. Okay, so how do you articulate how you just did that beautifully with us here? How do you articulate that to businesses to, okay, here's step 1, and I know my gosh, the list of companies that you've worked with is so impressive. How do you do it? How do you start your process with the company?
So I try with any given company to understand what their pain points are. What are they seeing that they want support with? It's a lot of employee burnout or anxiety or overwhelm. It's a lot of attrition and turnover. And these things are often not in and of themselves the problem. They're kind of a symptom of a deeper problem. And so I try to appeal to the idea that the more you work on your mental and emotional health before things are really problematic, the more likely you are to prevent big issues. And so a lot of what I talk to companies about is, rather than waiting till people are really burnt out and then trying to give them a perk or a vacation to fix it, how can you prevent burnout? How can you keep it from happening in the first place? What can you put into place in a more proactive way? And then with companies, I often find that all that people really need is just a little bit of recognition and validation for the things that they're struggling with, and tips and tricks and tools for how to work this practice into their life every single day. And that's why I like this concept of emotional push-ups. It's the idea of what are little quick exercises that you can do every day to improve your mental and emotional health, rather than feeling like you have to do a complete overhaul.
Could you share some of those? Because that is fascinating. And I know the listeners are stopping whatever they're doing right now and they want to write this down. What are those emotional and, psychological fitness push-ups that we could do?
For sure. So if you think about what a physical push-up is, it's just this little physical exertion. And one of them won't make you a lot stronger, but when you do them every day, you're going to be able to do more and more, and you're going to get stronger in other parts of your life. You'll be able to carry groceries and pick up your kids, and even stave off illness because your body's in better shape. So similarly, an emotional push-up is anything that will put you just a little outside of your emotional comfort zone so that you can grow. So some examples, and remember that what's outside of one person's comfort zone might not be out of someone else's. So you have to think about, where are my areas of comfort? And how can I push myself out just a little bit? So, for example, if you're someone who says yes to everything that's asked of you, and then you end up feeling really overwhelmed and resentful, an emotional push up for you might be saying a kind but firm no to one small thing today. Whereas if you tend to focus more on yourself, an emotional push up might be to offer someone else some help today. Other emotional push ups are things like apologizing for a mistake, or asking for feedback, or letting yourself feel upset about something instead of telling yourself just to push on. Or maybe an emotional push up for you is just putting your phone away an hour before you go to bed instead of scrolling until the second that you close your eyes. And the idea is, if you push yourself a little out of your comfort zone every day, not only will you get better at doing that, but you will see benefits in other parts of your life that you can't even wrap your mind around yet until you start doing the work.
So is it safe to say that, do you arm, for lack of a better term, leaders and companies with ways in which to help the people that report to them do these emotional exercises? I know they're not qualified as you are, of course, but do you try to have it, in other words, your message spread? Because it's hard to get to all, theoretically, 1,000 employees, 2,000 employees, even 500. How is your system embraced and then passed along?
So I always start with leadership, and I try to convey the idea that a leader asking employees to do something that they're not doing themselves is not going to be an effective strategy. Just like a parent telling their kids, hey, because I said so, do this, but the parent's not doing it, the kid's not really going to take that in as a habit over time. So it's really important that leadership prioritizes their emotional fitness first, and then trusts that there will be a ripple effect from there. Not only because it shows that it's important, but also it models what it actually looks like. So when I work with a company, I often start with leadership, but then I try to just give as many ideas as I can about what these emotional push-ups can look like, what kind of exercises they can do, and where they can find more over time so that they can keep the practice going.
Okay, so for that, let's look at this where you work with everybody. Coa, explain this to us because I think this concept is fascinating and I think it will really resonate with our listeners because, as you know, we have sports folks on, coaches and people that study mental health and CEOs and presidents. So we're all over it. So I think that everybody, again, is going to stop and listen to this. Tell us this concept, please.
Absolutely. So Coa is a mental health startup that I co-founded with Alexa Meyer, and Coa is a gym for your mind. It is a place for you to do your emotional push-ups and work on your mental and emotional health in an ongoing proactive way. And Co essentially helps businesses that want to support their employees with their emotional fitness by providing classes that are taught by licensed therapists. I think that's one thing that really distinguishes us is that our classes are live and we have recorded classes and an app as well, but the main offering are live classes with a licensed therapist where people will learn about how to build their resilience, how to become more self aware, how to communicate more effectively. And the idea is that it is hard for leaders to know how to support their employees with this, and COA can help with that.
Okay, Dr. Emily. So you have your practice, you have Coa, you're an author, you're doing a ton of content. How do you juggle all this? How do you think like an entrepreneur and remain emotionally and psychologically healthy? Because I am doing it, and we can go on and on about that, but that's for another podcast. So tell me how you do it, please.
Well, I would have to say I really credit having ADHD. I see ADHD as a difficult thing, but also a superpower. I did my doctoral research on ADHD, and one of the interesting things about it is that I almost need to be doing 20 things at once in order to focus on any of them. So I've never been a person who's only taken on one thing at a time. For me, I need all the stimulation of many projects in order to focus. So that I think is really my secret for how to do it. And I would say that a lot of entrepreneurs, CEOs, founders, and leaders will resonate with that because there's quite a big overlap of those positions and ADHD. But just in general, for me, I think having a lot of organizational systems in place has been really important to me. And again, not waiting until I'm really struggling to work on myself or to get support with things. So I have learned the lesson that if you wait until you're completely burned out to work on yourself, that's little like waiting until you've run out of gas to try to get to a gas station. It's now going to be much harder to get what you need because you're on the side of the road. Versus if you see, oh, I only have a quarter tank left, I should probably think about this now instead of waiting. That's a little what it's like to work on yourself proactively.
Okay, so you're a leader, you work with leaders. Let's get to the concept because here's something I hear a lot in the work that I do, which is similar to yours, but obviously different. The concept of servant leadership, right? Which really resonates with a lot of people. If you sit five people in a room from different industries and do honestly, a 5 minute presentation on servant leadership, they're going to say yes, 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 and yes. However, when you take that servant leadership a little bit too far, you can compromise, your health, because you're constantly taking on, in theory, different boundaries that perhaps might not work for you. I live that. That's a personal thing for me. That's where I was not very good as a leader, that my boundaries were extended and I would take on the emotions of others. So I'm sure I was not alone. How do you deal with that? That's so interesting to me that I want to be there for not me personally, but a leader would say, I want to be there for my people, but look at me. I'm exhausted because
Mm.
I'm taking on all their worries, pains, and I'm not promoted or this complaint, that complaint.
So, one of the seven traits of emotional fitness is empathy. And one of the things I talk about when you're learning about empathy is that empathy and boundaries are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are extremely dependent on each other. To be a good leader, to be an empathetic person at work, you yourself have to be pouring from a full cup. You're not doing anyone any favors by giving away more than you actually have to give. The whole airplane theory, put your own mask on before you put on someone else's, is really important. And I have seen a lot of leaders burn themselves out trying to take care of everyone else. But I like to think often when I think about leaders, I do often think about parents. Of course, a leader is not the same thing as a parent, but there are a lot of interesting ways to think about the overlap. So, a parent who is so sacrificial of themselves to their kids that they never take care of themselves, it's not actually doing their kids any favors. It does not teach the kids the importance of taking care of yourself, putting yourself first, making sure that you're resourced. And similarly, a leader who gives away more of themselves than they have will end up resentful and burned out. So there has to be a balance, of course. And I think that you have to trust that you are actually taking care of your relationships by having strong boundaries and by not offering more than you actually have to give.
Okay, I have one more for you, and then we're going to jump to all-star moments. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, last question here. You wrote an article that I researched and found, and here's the quote from you, which I think is awesome. And you referenced Friends, the TV show, and then you also weaved in the song Dreams from Fleetwood Mac and a few years back when it became this craze. You said, quote, nostalgia can combat feelings of loneliness. That is so interesting. Can you take that in an area that can help us and those listening, please?
Yeah, so that article was talking about why we often will watch a show we've seen 1,000 times every single night. There are people who watch Friends or, Seinfeld or whatever your show is, they'll watch it over and over. And there was a question of why this might be. And I was thinking about how, especially coming out of this time where we sort of forgot how to people, we're relearning in a way how to people with each other, we will often turn to comfortable and familiar and low risk ways of getting connection. And that can go to an extreme. I think social media is an example of this, that in a way we're more connected than we've ever been, and yet we're lonelier than we've ever been because it's not genuine connection. And similarly, I think watching a show every night can provide some comfort. There's the nostalgia of having watched that show many years ago, but it can't replace the beautiful, energizing force that is in-person connection. And so I do try to stress that we really need each other and we should find connection wherever we can, but don't forget to prioritize actually turning off the TV, getting out of the house, and going and being with your people.
Oh, great. That is great. Okay, all-star moments. Rapid fire, first thought, best thought. Are you ready? Here we go.
Okay.
Okay. We will get to all-star moments in just a second. To grow as a leader, you must make intentional choices about how you want to show up for yourself and your team. Are you ready to grow your leadership? The Gargano Leadership Group offers expert coaching, consulting, and workshops rooted in our 4 leadership pillars: curiosity, alignment, optimism, and self-awareness. Leadership starts with forging authentic connections, communicating your values, leading with energy and enthusiasm, and truly understanding yourself. Visit garganoleadership.com to get started with us today. Back to the show. All right. To that point, who's your favorite Friends character?
Oh, my favorite Friends character was always Phoebe because she is eccentric. She's not afraid to be who she is. She's self aware and she manages to be kind despite a very complicated and traumatic past.
Now we're going to get a little bit more in depth here. Number 1 work challenge today is
Maintaining motivation and balancing your work life and the rest of your identity and making sure that they do not overlap completely, making sure that you have places outside of work that are important to you, passions that you love, but that you also enjoy the work you do enough of the time that it doesn't feel like a drain on your life.
what advice would you give somebody, because this time of year, what advice would you give somebody graduating college and shortly they will go into the professional world to take care of themselves? They have a fresh slate. They're just about to embark on this wonderful life as a professional. What would you say?
I think my truest advice would be consider therapy. I think a lot of people think that therapy is only for those who are really struggling, but actually, therapy is for anyone who wants to better understand who they are in the world. And it's such a wonderful thing to do proactively. You will prevent a lot of issues in your life and your career if you know yourself and understand your tendencies and your patterns before they have played out on the professional stage. So think about getting into therapy now.
Now, equally, Dr. Emily, there's somebody listening right now, and maybe they're 35 years into their career. They want to change. They want to not be viewed as the ogre. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but like somebody who's mean or making someone feel this, and they just aren't identifying with the 5 generations that we have in the workplace. What would you tell that person today?
Hmm. I mean, I would say firstly something similar. Get into therapy and understand why you are the way you are and why people perceive you the way that they do. But I think another insanely valuable tool that we undervalue is soliciting feedback. We tend to wait until we receive feedback, but most people will not tell you what they really think if you don't ask them.
Describe yourself as a clinical psychologist in one sentence.
I am someone who believes in the importance of giving yourself and others the benefit of the doubt and in committing yourself to working on yourself first in order to see change in your life.
Emily, that was tremendous. Thank you so much. That was such a thoughtful and wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
And we thank Dr. Emily very much for coming on the show. Here are my takeaways. This is from her book, This Thought: Unhealthy Mind, Unhealthy Bottom Line. That's why Emily's book and what we talked about today and all of the work she does with her clients is so important. As business people, we all need to focus on our business relationships and pay as much attention to them. They're as important as our personal relationships. Think about it. How much time do we spend at work? You heard Emily. It takes a lot of work to make sure we're okay, so we're there for others. And that's how those relationships improve. To that point, when leaders work on themselves, their results trickle down. That's also another point that Emily makes in her book, as well as in our conversation today. The soft skills, work on them, talk about them, think about your EQ, and make sure that you're mentally healthy. And lastly, the importance of taking care of yourself and having empathy for yourself throughout this process. In your work world, when it becomes very stressful, setting boundaries, very important. You heard Emily. We have to make sure that not only empathy for others is important, but empathy for ourselves. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Congratulations to Dr. Emily Anhalt again on her book releasing today. And I hope you get yourselves a copy. Obviously, the information on it will be in the show notes. Take care, everybody. Have a great week. Review, like, share the podcast. You know we appreciate it. Take care. We'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Keep the Line Moving. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave a review. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Most importantly, share this podcast with your friends, family, and coworkers. It means the world to us. If you have a guest recommendation, visit our website at garganoleadership.com, where you'll also find all our archived episodes. For our marketing coordinator and the producer of this podcast, Savin Narwhal, I'm Chris Gargano. Have a fantastic week, everybody.